Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. I hope you enjoy. Out of the Madness, written by Lostful. Yalto watched in horror as his expeditionary crew was torn apart by the monsters in the pod. This horror had to end. Moments before, Yalto had looked out into the void from the bridge of his ship at a new pod they had found. These pods were occurring with a frightening frequency that only seemed to be increasing. Containing them and checking what kind of life they held had been the prime directive for the Galactic Collective. All life in the universe started in these pods, but most of them contained monsters. His containment team, Team 1560, had held the line for almost 50 years. The situation had gotten worse over the last 200 years. The monsters grew more sophisticated and terrible with each passing year, with fewer helpful races being found. His squadron had encountered another new pod of unknown design and origin. Years of dealing with these monsters had made them cautious. They had sent a boarding team of 5 over to evaluate its occupants. Initially, it appeared everything was quiet. That was until they reached the portion that looked like a cargo room. In the dark depths of that room, the team's broadcast showed a flash movement. Clicking sounds could be heard all over. "Pull back!" Yalto had immediately started shouting at the team, but it was too late. Small robotic-looking bugs seemed to stream from everywhere. His team tried to fight back, but the feed streamed their last few moments before they too went dark. Yalto was gripping the edges of his seat with his taloned hands as he issued the order to his crew. "Destroy it!" These monsters actually appeared to be consuming everything around them to make more of themselves. He grimly watches as the pod breaks apart, carefully monitoring to ensure none of the horrors survive. Everyone knew the pods came from the Creator. He was always flinging his newest creations into space, just as he had done with Yalto's race, the Snake. They were a cold-blooded reptilian race with 2 arms, each ending in 5 taloned hands. Generally, a typical snake was 5 to 6 feet when moving or raised. They believed themselves to be one of the oldest races holding the line. Every race knew the story. In a flash, the first of their race found themselves looking in the face of a strange creature. This creature they knew as the Creator. He appeared as though made of sand and constantly shifting. None had a clear description of what he looked like, but he was generally described as a mammalian creature with 2 arms and 2 legs. His eyes burned of light as he spoke the same to each race. "You are unique. You shall have your chance." He would then tell them who they were before he launched them from the blue orb of creation into space. In the last 200 years, containment had gotten significantly harder. The Creator continued launching more and more into the void each year, each more sophisticated and more dangerous than the last. Every so often, a monster so terrifying they couldn't even figure out how to kill it would show up. Standard practice was to destroy the pods, then try to use weaponry to drive the floating bodies into a planet they had deemed uninhabitable. Planets that met this fate were marked purgatory and were off limits to prevent escape. Monsters such as the atmosphere blob that consumed all it touched often met such fates. Recently, a rather torn-up monster with 2 arms and 2 legs carrying a melee weapon and wearing a mask posed such a challenge. Both were driven onto nearby rocks and left with monitoring stations to try and ensure that they did not escape. All pods had to be checked. Allies to hold the line were sorely needed, but the chitinous spider and canine lupus did their best, but even they struggled to hold it. It's amazing what a shared threat could do to help unite a galaxy. Many viewed the passing of the line as a trial of intelligence. If a race survived to escape from the horrors of the Cradle World, then they were ready to help defend their new universe. The containment forces were a coalition of all existing races. They served 2 purposes. They looked for friendly and intelligent races escaping to help them find worlds to settle on. And they tried to destroy or contain the nightmares that were too dangerous. None dare go back to the Cradle World. It was a home to monsters. Yalto could not help but wish he could ask the Creator some very pointed questions. Why did something so powerful find entertainment in inflicting such horror upon them? With great sadness, Yalto records the loss of another of his boarding teams. Sadly, this is all too common of an occurrence. You did not risk bringing back a boarding team that had met hostiles without being sure of their condition. A couple years ago, he had encountered a parasitic life form that had cost his fleet a ship. It had embedded its eggs into a member of the boarding team. Believing him wounded, they had brought him back on board. The monster killed him and escaped into the ship. As it began to hunt and kill crew, the remainder of the fleet had been forced to destroy the ship. The only glimpses of it they ever got was a black chitinous shell. They had even been forced to destroy the escape pods for fear that the creature might make it to a habitable world. Yalto's fleet was one of hundreds encircling the Cradle World, all trying to ensure its horrors did not reach civilization. Sadly, his story and situation were far from unique. Bitterly, he thought to himself, "This must end." Less than 4 hours later, the communicator erupts in chitters. Spitter just encountered several pods at once. They were desperately calling for backup, fear of what they were to encounter evident in their voices. "This is Yaltol of the Snake. What is your situation?" he called out.
"This is the clack of the Spitter. These pods appear to be filled with extremely large reptiles. We are down to less than one expeditionary crew left. We need support."
Yalto knew he couldn't abandon his sector. At the same time, the escape of any of those pods would render a planet uninhabitable, and all of the Creator's pods were headed to a livable world. It was a desperate fight of survival. Before containment had become a priority, one would have been lost to creatures made of fire, and another to those of shadow. Those worlds were still occupied by those spirits, no longer habitable for the remainder of the galaxy. It was a large part the reason why they were here. He initiated a short burst communication to the home fleet. They must know of the situation. While Klaak could undoubtedly pop the pods, without reinforcements, she would have to assume all were hostile. The loss of even one potential allied race would severely hurt their ability to hold the line. To his shock, quickly he received 2 short burst communications back. The first was confirmation of receipt and confirmation of reinforcements. The second from General A. Konda, the Snake, that he was en route to Yalto's location. This creature war had raged for as long as any could remember. General A. Konda had watched his brothers, sisters, and children lose their lives in it. Sadly, his situation was no different than any of the other living beings in the galaxy. This mad creator continuously launching pods, most filled with horrors bent on destruction of life, into their galaxy. Something had to be done. The lines were starting to falter after the barrage of the last 200 years, and the creatures were getting more and more lethal. It was with a heavy heart that General approached what must come next. The council met, and it was decided that someone must approach the Creator to try and get him to see reason, stop him from unleashing his monsters upon the galaxy. With this mission, the General approached Yalto's small fleet. More ships were incoming to take its place on the line, and more fodder were en route to the Spitter as well. The boarding teams faced casualties that were truly horrifying. Over the centuries, this war had spanned, and they had resorted to primarily using criminals for this duty. But even that wasn't always enough. The current draft to fill them was all morale crashing. The General would be lying if he said he did not fear his current objective, to face a god, the creator of all life, and ask him to cut it out. It sounded like a myth, not a mission. As General A. Konda reached the fleet, he informed Yalto of his new mission. A young commander would take up his spot on the line. Yalto and 4 of his ships were to escort the General into the Forbidden Zone to meet the Creator. Yalto could feel his blood freeze even in the warmth of the artificial heat lights. Stories were told of the journey to the Creator's world, of the horrors that were seen. Also, there were no ports of respite along the journey. During the mission, they were to also survey the worlds they passed until they met the Creator. This information they would continuously broadcast out to the galaxy to document what they find. With foreboding, they launch into their odyssey. The first system they entered, they could see signs of where crash pods had hit. One planet looked like nothing more than a perfectly smooth ball. On closer examination, they could see the surface moved in an unnatural way, like a blob of gelatin had encircled it. The planet was far smaller than it had been when they last surveyed. This was the purgatory world of the blob. As they traveled through the systems, almost every planet they saw bore some horror, from skeletal remains, monstrous beasts, living shadows, to even include dragons. Pods always targeted planets capable of sustaining life. The fact that they saw so many meant that these planets were no longer considered as such. They had even seen a planet encased in fire. Over it were 13 rings, and each ring was filled with flickering lights that one could easily imagine to be tortured souls. Even from space, the giant red monster lording over this world was visible. He looked right at their ship when they turned the survey camera towards him. His smile was frightening. Along the way, hundreds more of the pods could be seen floating through space, carrying their lethal cargo. Finally, they reached the center of the madness, home of the Creator. As they entered his system, they saw the first planet, the planet of death, with its purple hue. On it walked a spectre, cloaked in black, and its surface was littered with bones. None knew its story or wanted to go down to ask. Next came the planet of the seas. Its surface was a constant storm, roiding the methane seas that covered it. A golden, trident-shaped building could be seen in the eye of the great storms below. With a scanner, it appeared that there was life below the surface. Only dark shapes and movement could be seen. Trepidation grew significantly as they approached the world of the sky snakes. Their own legend said they had come from this planet originally. While ruin covered the planet, nothing that resembled civilization remained. Its surface scorched and etched, much like the tree struck by lightning. As the next planet came into view, they could see the rings. Some massive fight in its ancient history had killed the planet of the god of seas, the oldest of the Titans. Like voyeurs in the playground of death and destruction, they cruised on. The next planet that they were warned to avoid, even the ancient star chart said that it was home of the god of thunder. They could see his red eye watching them as they approached. Lightning flashed all over its surface. Never did they dream it could lash out so. Yalto watched in horror as two ships caught Orcs from the planet. One plunged into the atmosphere of the planet, only visible due to the amount of electricity slamming into it. The other crashed into the nearby asteroids. 50 men he had known for most of his life lost their lives that instant. There was nothing to do or say. They had to push on. Never had he nor the general said anything as they continued their approach towards the blue orb. They passed an angry red ball of the planet, the signs of active combat readily visible on its surface. From the way the lines ebbed and forwards and backwards, neither ever gaining a real advantage. It looks as though it could go for all time, a dance between perfectly balanced parties. Finally, they reached the blue orb. "Take the shuttle down near those buildings," the general ordered, pointing to what appeared to be the ruins of a city in the northern part of one continent. There appeared to be a storm of some sort on the world as well, but it stayed away from the city. Landing near the edge of the city, they sent out their scout teams to try and understand this world of the Creator. Very quickly, though, the scout teams came running back, begging Yalto and the General Anaconda to come and see the ghosts that walked this earth. The storm still visible in the distance, now clearly a sandstorm. These ghosts were not like the shades that they'd seen prior. They were light, but completely unaware of them. The world surrounding them was ruins, but where the ghosts traveled, the buildings suddenly were completed. It was mesmerizing to watch. In a distant building, a faint light appeared to head up, and from there they suddenly saw a pod shoot off. Immediately, the General and Yalto began running in that direction. Picking up his communicator, Yalto called back to his remaining ships, but got no response. Looking back, all he could see was the wall of sand. His ships and crew were gone. It was now just him and the General. Approaching the building with the light, the world seemed to be dimmer. The ghosts walked around them, but equally unaware. On the side of the building was a sign of their people, or so they assumed. Rod of Asclepius, long thought by his people to be a sign of their once great influence. Entering the building, they continued to follow the lightly glowing sand. Behind them, they could see the storm following, swallowing all they passed. Finally, on the second floor, they found the Creator. He sat over the body of one of the ghosts, only this one appeared almost solid. It was a mammalian creature with ape-like features. The General and Yalto froze in that doorway, watching as the Creator reached above it and grabbed something. A pod then grew in its hand and flew away, following the light. The Creator then looked at them. Those glowing eyes and the ever-shifting face of sand were mesmerizing. He gave them what was almost a sad smile. "Time is coming to an end, my friends. I've done all I can to protect this young one, but he is passing, and with it all he created in our world." "But you are the Creator, aren't you?" the General began. The Creator just shook his head. "No, I'm the Sandman. I protect the Creator while he sleeps. What you see before you is a human. The latent psychic power of his unconscious mind creates all you see. Unfortunately, the seed of creation you are looking for is about to wake."
"How do you know this?" insisted Yalto in horror.
"They came to save the world, not hear about it all being destroyed. It can't end like this." Sandman answers, "Because he is near his destination. He has been in cryostasis this whole time. All in our universe he had created. I've done all I can to keep him peaceful slumber, but the machines have already begun to wake him up, as his mind leaves this plane to return to the reality of his own. It'll take all that it created here with it. This universe ends with each trip, young ones." Sandman looked at the two would-be saviors and smiles. Suddenly, the realization sets in that the Sandman looks like a young man, the sandstorm getting closer. This is really the end. End of story. I would quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and Patreons. Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Barky, Lord Azrakal, It's Difficult to Pronounce, Dragzoon WRE, Holly's Sister, Arcadian. Thank you very much.